Welcome to the first OAR presentation for 2022. I'm Graeme Adamson, coordinator of the OAR program. We had our usual holiday in January, however, we do apologise that it was not possible for us to arrange for a presentation during February. Events, I think, affecting all of us overtook us, and it just wasn't possible. But anyway, we are here today with, I think, a fascinating topic. The topic for conversation between Dr. Francis Macnab and Dr. Steven Koski is embracing life's imperfections as we age. I'm hoping that we might get a definition of perfection. So we'll just see what happens as we go. So are you perfect? I know I'm not. However, let's hear what Francis and Steven have to say about their perfections. So, Steven, over to you.
Thanks so much, Graeme. Should I be a typical American here and say, well, am I not the embodiment of perfection? Need you look any further? Obviously, just kidding. Thanks for that welcome. Francis, great to see you.
Great to see you. Hello.
Yeah, so glad to have this chance. I think we should stop looking for that picture of perfection, Graeme, because I guess what I'd like to talk about is the truths, I guess, that there's no such thing as perfect. As I like to say, there's no such thing as perfect. There is only life, and life is never perfect. Life is messy, it's imperfect, and it rarely goes as planned. I mean, I think much of I'm really curious what your thoughts are on this, Francis, because I think much of the stress and the anxiety that we experience in life is the picture that we have in our head of how we think life should be. The picture we have in our head of how we think we should be, and the fact that that picture rarely matches reality. So the picture that we have of how we think life should be, that picture of perfect perhaps, doesn't match the way life is. I mean, I was talking to someone today who actually apologized to me because they're really having a difficult day. They're really struggling. And I said, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic on the brink of World War III. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to struggle. I mean, this person wasn't even allowing themselves to just kind of have a few challenges today. So I think life isn't the way it's supposed to be. Life just is imperfect. And I often think it's tempting, I think we fall into the temptation to think that we'll get back to living our life tomorrow. You know, when my body doesn't ache so much, or when I feel better, or tomorrow when the mess is cleaned up, or the problem is solved, or the conflict is resolved, or when the grief is healed, or the tears are dried up. And wisdom, I think, and I'm really curious what you think about this, Francis, now wisdom, I think, is recognizing all of that is life. There's no perfect. There's only life. And it's how we choose to live with life's imperfections that make all the difference. I was just told recently that the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, it takes 7 years to paint it. So they start on one side, and because of all of this, the sea salt and the water splashing up and corroding it, they start on one side. It takes 7 years. And before they actually get to the other side and finished, they have to start over again. So they're never, ever done. And I thought about that, you know, that's kind of like life. We're never, ever finished. We're always kind of in process. We're always in the middle. We're always in the mess. And we can't always choose what happens, but maybe we can choose how we live with the mess and the imperfections. So what do you think about this idea of letting go of the picture in our minds of how we think life should be, so that we might learn to accept life as it is and all its glorious imperfections? What do you think? Over to you.
Hello. How do we live life with all its imperfections? Well, I don't know. Do you? Well, you know that life comes at us in different ways, and we have to live it.
Yeah.
And well, we can say I'm not going to be there today, but ordinarily, here it is. What are you going to make of it? Does it have to be like this? Can we make some changes in it, in life, or in ourselves? So I think I hear you say, well, there it is coming at us. How can I live it differently? By virtue of the attitude I have, by virtue of the way I see myself, by what I might see in you or remember in you. So we've got this dialogue taking place all the time. How will I be when we speak next?
I mean, I love that sense that you're talking about, is this image of life coming at us. And we might not be in control of how life comes at us, but we can ask, how will we deal with that? I heard you say, what will our attitude be? How will we approach this? Can we approach this differently? I mean, I sometimes think of the train, that sometimes we're on this train and we're barreling down the track, and it doesn't do me a lot of good to jump up and down and yell, I don't want to be on this train, and try to jump off the train and be angry with the person who gave me the ticket to be on this train. Maybe through my attitude, I can slow the train down. Maybe I can choose what seat I'm going to sit on the train. Maybe I can choose a window view. Maybe I can choose to engage in conversation with the people who are on the train. I think in some ways, when I think about aging, and I think of my body, I think of my body as I age, and I'm on a train and it's going in one direction. And it doesn't do me a lot of good to be angry about that, to yell at the person who gave me the ticket on this train. I don't want to be on this train. But maybe if I care for myself, maybe if I show myself a little compassion, I could slow the train down. Maybe I can choose what seat I'm going to sit in. I have an autoimmune disease that attacks all my joints. So I'm in chronic pain all the time. I have 2 artificial hips. I have knees I've been told that need to be replaced. Now, this isn't a woe is me, because I actually have a pretty good life. I'm not complaining. But it's not the picture in my head of how I thought I would be at this age. The picture in my head is I would still be running marathons at the age of 90. So my reality is not matching the picture in my head. And I'm now realizing how angry and disappointed I've been in my body. Now, what's really interesting to me is I've run 4 marathons, and I've climbed a mountain after my hip replacements. Now, in one way, to me, that's a sign of determination, a sign of resiliency of our spirit. But I ran those marathons against my surgeon's advice. My surgeon said, if you want to buy me a second vacation home, feel free to keep running because you're going to end up in my office again and again and again. And I realized by continuing to run these marathons, it was a symbol of my anger and my unwillingness to accept reality, to accept that I'm on this train, to accept life's imperfections. My body does not match the picture in my head of the way I want it to be. And I was treating my body with all of its ailments as something to defeat and overcome, a problem to wrestle into submission, rather than accepting the imperfections of my body and extending a little compassion to myself. I love yoga, and I usually do yoga by myself. I went to a class. I went to a yoga class. I think I doubled everybody's age in this class, and I was a summer sausage. So if you can picture this, I looked like a summer sausage in this yoga class, where everybody else looked like this perfect twisting pretzel who could shape shift at the snap of their fingers, where I was just kind of stiff. And I think the yoga teacher kind of could read my mind, because she came over to me and she said, where you are is exactly where you need to be. Don't fight your body. Work with your body. Don't compare yourself to others. Just be on your path. And then she said, don't kind of push your stretch like you're fighting. She said, breathe compassion and gentleness into the stretch and just accept where you are. That was pretty profound to me. So what do you think about this idea about the wisdom of not fighting and struggling against the imperfections of our life or our body, but trying to find ways to extend ourselves compassion, to breathe a little compassion, however we find ourselves?
Well, it's easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easier to say, this is what we should do, could do, but we don't do it. Because life we put ourselves in front of the picture, our own picture. So this is how I am. It's not easy sometimes. But then on the other hand, supposing we be a little bit more joyful and say, I'm pleased to be here. Huh? I could be out in the cemetery. No, I'm here. And life is meant to be a breathing experience, breathing goodness, breathing pleasure, breathing happiness into myself and into other people around me. How can I do that? Is it possible? Yes, it is. How can I put some person into that empty chair and say, now, be the person you'd like to be? Practice it.
I love that. Part of what I'm hearing you say is pay attention to the voice in your head, and rather having that critical voice that judges and kind of punishes you. What would happen if you had a different voice that was more gentle, more accepting, but also said, well, you're here. How can you make the most of it? Where's the joy? Where's the beauty? Where's the life? I love that poem, and I'm not going to be able to remember it right now, by Joan, what's her name? Jane Kenyon, where she said, it could have been otherwise. You know, where she talked about eating breakfast and eating a perfect peach and just enjoying the taste of a perfect peach. And she says, because it could have been otherwise. You know, what you're saying reminds me of when I actually lived in Adelaide, and I had the privilege, thanks to you, eternally grateful, to be the director of Cairnmillar Adelaide while I lived there. And I was conducting a leadership training for the United States Air Force in Woomera, of all places. Now, there's the Outback and there is Outback, and Woomera was Outback. Just extraordinary. So I was in Woomera, and I conducted a day's training to the officers that were on that base. And after the training, I was invited to go on a night walk. And the darkness, because Woomera is in the middle of nowhere, so there's no city lights anywhere. And the darkness was so thick, and the stars, I mean, the stars felt like they were reaching down to greet me. And I was offered night vision goggles. Have you ever worn night vision goggles?
Yeah.
Amazing how they illumine the light that's invisible to the naked eye. So anything your naked eye can't see, you put these goggles on, and all of a sudden, there it was. And I put these goggles on, and all of a sudden there were billions and billions of stars dancing in the sky that had been there the whole time. I just didn't see them. And I thought about that, you know, sometimes when we focus on life's imperfections, when we focus on life's struggles, you know, maybe we don't see the light in the darkness. Meister Eckhart, who you also introduced me to, that 14th century mystic and theologian, he said it's in the darkness that one finds the light. So even when we are in sorrow and grief, that's when the light is nearest to us, whether we see it or not. So it seems like when we cling to darkness, when we cling to everything that's wrong, leaving no room for light, that's when we experience despair. When we worship the light and pretend everything's fine when it's not fine, I think that's when we can kind of get Pollyannish and out of touch with reality. So it seems like the challenge is to embrace the darkness, embrace the imperfections, embrace that life doesn't always go as the way we wish it would. But trust, even there is light, whether we see it or not. So Francis, what suggestions would you have for us as to how to find the light that's hidden in the shadows of life's imperfections?
How can we find light, some light, when the darkness is so real?
Right.
So we need to have a view of the darkness. We need to look and say, what is this darkness, before we get into it? To think about the darkness as something that happens to all of us at some stage. What's our view of it? Is it something that will last forever? Is it something which will overwhelm us? Or is it something in which we can say, no, it will pass, or no, it will be different by the different way we look at it, by the different way we call it. So can we put a different label on it? Darkness is terrible. Well, darkness is a way to discover the light. Now, as soon as we put those two statements side by side, we have possibilities. How can we live differently when we know that we can say darkness is terrible, or darkness can lead us to the light?
That is so important. What I'm hearing you say is you're inviting us to perhaps have a different relationship with the darkness. And, this, to move away from that dualistic kind of idea that, dark is bad, light is good. That maybe we can look at that differently. I mean, I think of the poetry of the creation story. What we're told in the poetry of the creation story, again, it's poetry, it's not science, but the poetry of the creation story is God gestated in the darkness before the explosion of creativity bringing forth the world happened. And I think of I'm in the middle of winter. You're not, but I'm in the middle of winter. It's cold out. There's snow on the ground. I just took my dog for a walk, and the ground is hard and icy. But prior to winter in the fall, when the leaves fell from the tree, seeds were planted. And deep beneath that cold, hard ground and the dark moisture of the soil, spring is already beginning. So new life, whether it be the darkness of the soil, the darkness of a womb, religious folks might say the darkness of a tomb. New life always seems to begin in the dark. So what I'm hearing you say is can we have a different relationship to the darkness, the imperfections, the struggles? I remember Forrest Church said what we tend to do when it's dark is we press our nose against it. And when we press our nose against it and obsess about it, everything becomes dark. So he said, can you take 3 steps back? And in taking 3 steps back, can you get a wider perspective? Can you recognize that there might be light shining through those panes of glass over there? It doesn't mean the darkness still isn't there. It's a reality. But can you hold the darkness, the grief, the sorrow in one hand, and hold your gratitude and joy in the other hand? And know that both are there. So is that sort of what you're saying?
It's important to say that we know that the light will shine again. Even though we're in the darkness now, we know by past experience, by other people's descriptions, by various experiences that we've had, that they've had, that things will change. Darkness can lift, and we can live through the darkness differently by virtue of knowing that we're on another trajectory.
What you just said kind of triggered for me the words of Gandhi. I mean, right now it's a dark time for our world, and it would be pretty easy to fall into a sense of despair, with good reason. And I think of Gandhi said, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won. There have always been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Always. And Gandhi said, think of that. Always. Desmond Tutu, who recently transitioned to more life, he put it a different way. He said, love wins. And if love isn't winning, which is most of the time, it just simply means the story isn't over yet.
That means he's saying you need to be patient. You need to be able to wait for the good things to happen. Well, sometimes the reality is that we are impatient. We don't want to wait. We want it to happen now. And the way we want it to happen is the way we want it to happen. So it's not all easy stuff. Where they say the reality is we live life through difficulties, but we live life believing that a better day is possible, that a better response is possible, that good things can follow, that we can be part of good things, even though at the moment, in every bad moment, we tend to think, well, this is dreadful. So in order to keep alive, our task is to keep alive the awareness that good things can yet happen. And we need to be part of it, part of them, good things.
I love that. We can, that what you just said, and we can be part of it. It's not like me to keep quoting scripture, so I hope you'll have to forgive. I hope you forgive me today, because I think of that passage from Romans where it says, "Do not be overwhelmed by evil," or "Do not be overwhelmed by the bad things, but overwhelm evil with goodness." So what's that one thing we can do? We can't fix the world. We can't fix the world. I love, there's a writer called by the name of Glennon Doyle, I'm a fan of. And she said, you can't fix the world, but the very least you can do is put your damn grocery cart back. So it's, what is the one thing in our little sphere, in our world, that we can change, that one good thing that we can do, one positive thing that we can do, one flower that we can plant in the midst of despair?
One word spoken. We can all speak a word, one word, to lift the current scene. One word can do it. One glance can do it. One action can do it. It really is important to realize that little things can lead us to be aware of the great gift of life.
Yeah.
From little things, big things can happen. And we can be part of them.
Right, okay. Reminded me of a story I wrote this morning for a post that I shared. Trying to address the despair and the helplessness that people are feeling. And it's the story of a dove who asks a robin, "How can you tell the weight of a snowflake?" And the robin says, "Well, the snowflake is nothing, weighs nothing." And then the robin said, "Okay, I was on a branch in a snowstorm. It wasn't a violent snowstorm, but the snow was gently falling in the silence around. And so I decided to count the snowflakes. And I got up to 3,455,132. And then the next snowflake, the 53rd one, or the 3 million, I can't remember what number I used there, but the very next snowflake, that one snowflake that weighed nothing, all of a sudden, the branch broke. And then the dove, who has been the symbol of hope since the time of Noah, thought about that story and realized maybe that one voice, that one word, that one action, maybe it does matter.
One extra snowflake can mean the branch looks good, or it bends over and falls by the weight of the snow. One snowflake extra can change everything. One word can change everything. One small action can change everything. For good, of course, for evil, for all is bad too, but we say, now we're looking at how can we plant something good in the world today? One word, one thought, one action, just one.
And I think part of that is the importance of not losing sight of what's most important. It seems we get lost in all sorts of extraneous things. As someone who officiates weddings, and you've officiated more than a few weddings in your life, I don't know about you, but I'm always amazed at the energy people spend to create perfect weddings. I mean, I tell couples when I officiate weddings, I said, you know, perfect weddings leave no stories to tell your grandchildren. I officiated one wedding. I remember one wedding where just an amazing, extraordinary amount of time and energy and resources was spent trying to create perfect. And it was time for the wedding, and everything was going perfectly. Everything was going according to the plan. The mother of the bride was beaming because she was the one putting all the energy into perfect. And everything was going as planned, so she was happy. And the couple, I just remember they were ready to make their vows, and the bride's face matched her dress. And she opened her mouth, and it wasn't the vows that came out. She projectile vomited, splattering vomit all over the groom, the flower girl, the bridesmaid, me. Everybody was screaming and crying. And when the screaming and the chaos kind of calmed, I didn't know what to do. I suggested, you know, why doesn't everybody go and clean up? And we'll reconvene in an hour. So they all went to clean up, and somebody cleaned up the altar. And an hour later, the bride and groom came back. They were now dressed in casual clothes. And the bride's face, she was still kind of pale and weak. And the groom kind of had his arm around her, kind of holding on what mattered most to him. But what was amazing to me, all of the perfect decorations, the perfect details that so much energy had gone into, were gone. All people noticed was the loving gaze between these two, as they vowed to love each other on the good days and on the days when they smelled like vomit. And I pronounced them husband and wife. And I just vividly remember, this was years ago, and I vividly remember that the husband, the groom, tenderly taking the bride's face in his hands. And remember, she had just vomited everywhere. And just tenderly placing his lips on her lips. Now, this was a less than perfect wedding. And in fact, most people would have called that a disaster. It was one of the most sacred moments in all of my years of ministry. You know, when they came back and they vowed to love each other and they tenderly kissed each other. It was one of the most sacred moments in all of my years of ministry that I've ever witnessed. And I'm guessing they have a few good stories to tell their grandchildren. So sometimes I think the treasure is found in the ruins. That life is far from perfect, but it can still be beautiful and good when we somehow find the beauty in the chaos. What do you think?
Well, one part of your story needs to be emphasized. That when they retold what happened, they no doubt laughed.
Yeah.
When they retold the story 6 years, 10 years, 20 years later, they laughed.
Yeah.
Terrific. So what was a disaster back then becomes something they could look at and say, do you remember? And they laughed. The power of laughter, even in the midst of terrible things, or in the aftermath of terrible things, is a great tonic, a great medicine. They laughed. Remember, that's possible. That even when the disaster is past, we can look back and say, do you remember what we did when such and such happened?
Yeah.
And they all sit back and laugh. Oh, yeah, I remember that. And somebody else has a different take on it and tells their story. And they laugh. Yeah. So what was previously a real disaster becomes a story after story after story about which we can laugh. Great gift.
Yeah.
Great gift.
That is so powerful. That is such an important reminder. I mean, I just recently was at the bedside of someone as they died, and the people gathered around, and there were a lot of tears. There was immense, deep, profound grief. But we started to tell stories. And as we started to tell stories, the laughter came. As people remembered, as you just said, do you remember when? Oh, do you remember when he did this? And so in the midst of the grief, which was real and deep, there was still laughter. So again, in the midst of the ruins, there's always a treasure that can be mined.
And notice, along with the laughter, there's memory. What a great gift memory is. Sometimes a memory is very powerfully negative. But if we look again, memory can be, we recall something good that happened. Do you remember such and such? Do you remember that? Do you remember that? So we keep pulling into the picture something that happened back then, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, 200 years ago. We remember, and the memory changes it, changes us. So memory is a great gift. And when you have a good memory, we know it's a great gift.
On my less than perfect days, I remember fondly the time spent with you, learning from you, working with you, and sharing conversations with you. And my heart is filled with deep gratitude. So thank you. So as always, Francis, it's a pleasure to spend this time with you. And I want to close with those words from the great composer and musician, Leonard Cohen, who reminds us there's a crack in everything, but that's how the light gets in. So as always, thank you for the light that you bring to my life and to so many.
Well, Stephen, Graeme, what a pleasure to talk to you. It crosses over many decades, many experiences, and we meet with good memories. So I thank you for it. Wish you well. Hope to have some more in the future.
Well, thank you, Francis and Stephen, for such a very fascinating discussion. I am a little disappointed. I didn't find out what perfection is. In fact, I found out that there's no such thing. So I'm on a learning curve. But I did learn to be compassionate to myself. Now, I don't know how easy that's going to be. And it reminds me that you've got to be aware of what your body is telling you. And if you accept the reality of that, then life, hopefully, will be better. But also, remember, you'll need patience to get to that point in life. And look for the light in the darkness. It sounds a bit strange, but I think it just means to look for the positives in any situation. And I think the great example of this was Stephen's wedding story. I know I certainly laughed about it, and I'm quite sure that our viewers will probably laugh about it too. And remember, little things lead to bigger things. In the old saying, great oaks from little acorns grow. Now, thank you for participating in the OAR program again for March, and we look forward to giving you another one next month in April. Goodbye for now.